In today's episode, Lindsay from Blind Eye Restoration joins me for Q&A. We've got bathroom remodeling on our minds as we talk about how to identify poor quality work and other problems lurking behind finished walls and floors. And later, Leslie Bryans from the Pines Preservation Guild in North Carolina explains the ins and outs of historic districts and what they mean for homeowners. But first, I'm Stacy Grinsfelder from Blake Hill House, and I'm the host of True Tales from Old Houses. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. May is National Preservation Month, also called Historic Preservation Month. Now, if you're unfamiliar, National Preservation Month began as a week-long yearly celebration in 1973. In 2005, the National Trust expanded it to include the entire month of May. The goal of National Preservation Month is to celebrate the nation's heritage through historic places and to promote history-related tourism. However, it is also an excellent time to talk about the social and economic benefits of historic preservation, which of course is preaching to the choir for most of you. I mention it because there are so many interesting preservation things going on right now. There are organizations across the country promoting a variety of activities on the local, state, and national levels for adults and kids. And that makes me want to jump in an RV and travel the entire month of May to experience as many of them as possible. Unfortunately, I can't do that. But if you go to the podcast website, truetalesfromoldhouses.com, I put some Preservation Month event links there that looked interesting. I tried to represent all of the regions of the U.S., so take a look at that if you'd like to take an in-person or virtual field trip to celebrate. What else? The bathroom remodel. It continues here at Blake Hill House. It's just chugging right along. The progress is slow and steady, but I guess that's still progress, right? After weeks of demo, I'm just now starting to put it all back together, and you can follow along with that project at blakehillhouse.com. Unrelated to the blog, I do have a little correction to make. During the last episode, I announced that I didn't have an Instagram live session to share because of a last-minute guest cancellation compounded by computer problems. My recording schedule sometimes puts the cart before the horse, and that was the case when I did announce that cancellation. At the 11th hour, I was able to put an Instagram live session together after all, and I invited the audience to be the guest and submit their window restoration questions, and we ended up having a lot of fun. So the recording from the April 22nd session is available on Instagram and the True Tales from Old Houses Facebook group. But wait, there's more. As the current schedule dictates, I hosted another Instagram live session on May 6th, and my guest was Paige Pauley. Paige was on True Tales from Old Houses during episode number 28. She and her husband, Trevor, live in Seattle, and they're reimagining a 1905 gable front vernacular cottage that had been entirely stripped of anything original long before they bought it. They started their project several years ago, and if you listen to that episode, you might remember that it included lifting and moving the house over only about 5 inches in order to satisfy local building codes. It was house moving on a teeny tiny scale. Well, it had been over 2 years since that interview, so it was fun to visit with Paige again and catch up on their progress. The recording from that session is also available now, again on Instagram and Facebook. The next Instagram Live will be Friday, May 20th at 8 p.m. Eastern, and I'll announce the topic and guest earlier that week. All right, listener Q&A is up next. My guest today for Q&A is Lindsay Jones from Blind Eye Restoration. Hi, Lindsay. Welcome back.
Hey.
It's so good to see you again. You were here during season 4 talking about your company, Blind Eye Restoration. And I think if my memory is correct, we've done a Q&A session before, but I don't remember what we talked about. Do you?
I think it was products, like
right.
New products versus old or something like that. Yeah, I think we talked about Abitron.
That's right. We did. Oh, they're a sponsor now, so that's cool. We can talk about them all day long. But yeah, I think we were talking about product compatibility now that you mentioned it. So that was during season 4. All right. Well, let me give some backstory about why I had you here today to talk about this particular topic with me. I recently, or I'm kind of in the middle, I wouldn't even say I'm at the middle. I feel like I'm back to the beginning of a major bathroom renovation after I hired a contractor whose work was subpar or less than subpar in some cases. And I've ended up having to remove all that work and kind of go back to the beginning. And you and I talked on Instagram and you're like, oh yeah, I just did a bathroom renovation too. And what I realized that most of the people who've been following along with me, their primary questions, so I admit I'm taking sort of liberties with this Q&A portion of the show, but the primary question they've had for me is, when you saw things that were finished, how did you know that something was wrong? And I had the benefit of seeing part of my bathroom project as it was coming together, and I saw some red flags, head scratchy moments. But you've mentioned that you just are, or you're still doing a renovation of a bathroom too. And I thought it would be good to get our combined experiences to answer that question. So I thought we'd start at the beginning, I guess. When everything's put together, what visible cues did you have that maybe the room that you are working on, your bathroom, what visible cues did you have that the room was not a sound structure?
Yeah. So I have the specific joy of having two bathrooms that are awful, awful, and needfully gutted, but I can't do them both at the same time. So I can tell you from experience, I have one that I still haven't dug into fully that I can tell from the surface everything is wrong. One is there shouldn't be water pooling anywhere on the floor if like water splashes out, or specifically if water doesn't splash out. You really shouldn't be having things leaking. There quickly became a leak in the ceiling of the dining room downstairs that we could see spotting right after I moved in. Somebody had painted it over and the staining started, and I haven't been able to get to it. It's not a very consistent leak, so it was very minor and it's just up there bugging me still. And then when, I don't know, when you take a walk through a house that you've just bought, you don't sit down on the toilet, right? I
True.
have not had that experience. But once we moved in, we realized the toilet kind of was squishy. Again, I haven't really torn up the bathroom, but since we moved in, we've had to do something to make it livable because obviously I need at least one functioning bathroom. And so we took the toilet up, pulled up the tile from around that area, realized that the subfloor was rotted. And so you pull up the subfloor and you realize that the joists, of course, all the plumbing has been cut directly through it. They put in the toilet flange upside down.
Okay.
The Y channel that goes into the actual sewer stack is at the wrong angle. And I'm pretty sure that means that, water runs downhill, right? I'm pretty sure the water is kind of just stagnating somewhere underneath my sink. So there's tub, sink, toilet, and then stack. And I don't think they put an angle on the plumbing. So I think they were just hoping that water gets down there, it'll just find its way rather than actually putting an angle. And so I think I have to entirely gut that bathroom because there's no chance that plumbing was done correctly to begin with.
Right.
Downstairs, we just didn't have water because the plumbing kept exploding during the wintertime. Ended up finding out that the foundation wasn't there. There was just like one side of a bathroom on a back porch.
So you were freezing from the cold weather. The water was always freezing. Okay. Yeah. So that's visual, a little bit visual. And then once you dug in, you realized there were some bigger things.
Yeah.
In my case, like I said, I was watching some of it come together, and I honestly thought, I second guessed myself. I thought maybe I just don't know. Like maybe this guy, he has a lock on how this works, and maybe it's just none of my business. Now, looking back, I realized that was kind of a female deferral that sometimes happens, like a little fallback behavior, which I'm not particularly proud of. But, sometimes those things happen. We second guess ourselves and we don't believe, oh, we must know the difference. But, one of the things that I found helpful was knowing what it was supposed to look like. So in cases of our tile, for instance, you're talking about no pooling, but my tile looked like it had gone through a earthquake. It was all wavy. And I knew that when you work with 1-inch hex, those come in 12 by 12 sheets. And I knew that if the spacing is wrong between the 12 by 12 sheets, then once you grout, you'll see every single individual 12 by 12 sheet instead of seeing a seamless pattern across your floor. So that was obviously wrong. Some things were too far apart. Some things were very much smashed together. There was not going to be any grout that fit in there at all. And one of the things he did was he left the edges undone. And I realized he was using mortar basically as filler. So some of my mortar was, thin adhesive depth, and some of
Mhm.
it was filling holes like an inch and a half deep. That's what he was using it for. Then, of course, the floor dipped. And if you put a level on it, you could clearly see that it pitched over and it was wavy in the middle. And so for me, it was pretty easy to tell right away that something was amiss.
Mhm.
But as we peeled back the layers, and you were talking about, you found the floor joists, the plumbing had gone through the floor joists and the subfloor, because the flange was upside down, so the subfloor was rotted, all of that. As I started to peel back the layers, I found that chunks of the hardybacker weren't actually even attached to the subfloor. He hadn't screwed them in. He was filling holes. And so he was just like chopping up pieces of hardybacker and sticking them in the holes with mortar or thin set, and then more on top of that. Some of the most vulnerable spots right around the shower lip, anywhere where you could have any sort of potential pooling, even though we're trying to avoid that, and that would become a vulnerability and eventually a leak. And that was just a mess. That's mostly where the chunks of hardybacker were and the thick sections of thin set. There was a lack of screws. He had used duct tape where there should be wire mesh tape that fits for the hardybacker, and then you put thin set over it.
Yeah.
So I think knowing what's supposed to be there helps you figure out what's not going to be there. In the case of your project, once you pulled back, because you've gutted one of the bathrooms, right?
Yes, we fully did. We are almost into the final finishing stages finally. But yeah, we 100% actually tore out the floor so you could see the foundation floor underneath the bathroom.
Okay, so then what did you see?
So it was originally, I think, just the back porch because the floorboards all still slanted down. It still has beadboard on the ceiling. The siding from the actual house was on the inside face. And when the door faced into our living room, and I didn't like that. I don't like bathrooms facing immediately into public spaces.
Agree.
So I turned it and we changed the orientation. It also helped us to keep the shower out of the window. You only have so many places to put it. And I didn't want to put in a vinyl window in my own house. So I changed the orientation of the doorway to put in the tub. And when we tore open that door, we actually found the original opening to that space. So we think that was maybe the original bathroom for the house, that they had built it onto the back porch, and it might have almost been like an outhouse situation.
Ah.
So they kind of enclosed it, but they didn't do a whole lot foundation wise still. And
Sure.
over the years, somebody had blocked in the front of the foundation of the porch, but not the side next to our hurricane doors to the basement. There was just literally like a loose flapping sheet metal piece there. And so, yeah, once we got down there, we're like, oh, there's just literally no wall here protecting us from the elements. So yeah, we rebuilt the foundation wall. I was crawling around down there with cement blocks and pouring footers. We did find a little bit of termite damage in the wall. When it was just a badly functioning bathroom, it was a lot of cheap Lowe's trim. It was a kind of a landlord special deal. The floor tile was large profile tile, but it was cracked in a couple of places.
Mm.
And upstairs, the tile, it's like somebody didn't know how to grout. They wiped all the grout on and then must have left it for 48 hours because I cannot get it off.
Oh, interesting.
You could tell somebody didn't know what they were doing.
Cracked tiles are always a good indication that something is
Mm-hmm.
amiss on the floor underneath. It might be your cement board, it might be your subfloor, but something is not quite right there.
Oh, yeah, definitely. So I have a question. Or I guess a comment. Earlier, you were saying that it was kind of like that female thing where you were deferred. I don't think it's necessarily a female thing. I think when you pay somebody to do something, and especially if you've done work before and you know it can get messy, you don't always want to see every phase of it or show everybody every phase of it. It doesn't mean it's wrong. It just means it's not the prettiest spot to be in. And so you try to it'll get better. It'll get better. And I don't think that that's necessarily a female deferment. I think you're trying to trust the person that you're paying to do the work because they supposedly know what they're doing. But yeah, having a healthy comfort level to be able to say, is that right? Can we fix that? Is there going to be any long-term implications of this? Trying to have that conversation, not that it would have changed your situation, but other people Because sometimes either it helps you pinpoint whether they really know what they're talking about, if it's something you really need to worry about, or at least to calm any nerves about, what's going on. Because yeah, if you've seen any of this stuff done, if you kind of understand what needed to happen in the first place, then you know enough to ask some questions.
Right. Absolutely. And I don't know why I went to that whole female thing because I really don't like to bring that up or point it out or think about it because it honestly
It's a thing
doesn't.
sometimes.
Sometimes it's a thing, but most of the time I don't think about it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it has to do a lot too with what I'm most familiar with. So, for instance, I've tiled a floor, I've done a subfloor, I've done hardy backer, but really only like once fully and another time partially. And it's been a long time. It was in a previous house. So I'm like, oh, well, I haven't done that for a while. But something I have done is patch walls, drywall with some regularity. And so one of the red flags he told me is he said, oh, I'll come in here and I'll do that drywall and I'll caulk the seams and I'll come in. And I was like, hold the phone. What the world are you talking about? Everybody knows you tape and mud a seam of drywall. You're going to caulk that seam? He's like, oh yeah, it'll be great. And I said, don't worry about the drywall. I'll finish it this weekend. And when you come back on Monday, it'll be done. And so I did it myself, and it was not even, I didn't second guess anything. I just went in and did it. So I guess there are visual things to wrap it up today. I guess there are visual things that you can see before you start to take rooms apart. Maybe it's like you said, some leaks. You noticed that there'd been some leaks, maybe even a wavy ceiling, something like a back porch that was enclosed to make something new. I think that's always kind of ripe for disaster, depending on when that renovation took place and what that room was turned into. There's always potential there for something to unfold that you're not expecting.
Oh, for sure. Old houses are full of surprises.
Right. And then once you get into it, I guess looking, especially in cases of rot, we're talking about bathrooms. So probably, what is that when you hear hoofbeats, think horses, not zebras? If I see leaking, or I'm thinking of the plumbing, I'm not thinking, oh, my roof is leaking. But wherever you are, if there is leaking, it's worth thinking about your roof, maybe, especially as you're talking about an enclosed porch.
You would think that it would have been fully insulated to be a room by now, but it was not.
People take shortcuts. That's just the way it goes. They do. All right. Do you have any last minute advice before we wrap for today?
Yeah. I mean, just spend some time in your space. Don't just throw somebody in, try and figure out a little bit of what's actually going on in there before you tackle anything. As soon as you get in, you'll always find more, but investigating a little bit on your own, even if you don't feel like you're a pro, people understand gravity. People understand what level and plumb is. There's a lot that can go into just that. Trust your gut.
Trust your gut, which I used to be really good at. And for some reason, I just lost my footing there for a little bit, but it's back. It's back.
You're going to do great. I'm excited to see it.
Well, I'm excited to see your bathroom project too. So when you're finished, send me a photo. I'd love to see it.
Oh, yeah. Got all the photos.
Great. Thank you so much for being here again today, Lindsay. It was so good to see you.
You too.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
If you have an old house or DIY question that you would like for me and a guest to answer on an upcoming episode, please contact the show, visit the True Tales from Old Houses website, or send me a direct message on Facebook or Instagram. And now it's your turn to answer a question. I want to know, what have you learned since buying your old house? Here are some of your answers from Instagram. Kelsey, also known as Seattle Tudor, wrote that she has learned the importance of historical materials and not blindly trusting what the tradesperson uses. That's definitely something to think about. This next answer sounds like something you might find in a fortune cookie. Jamie said, if no one can tell you how old the roof is, you will find out within the year that it needs replacing. Okay, business idea for someone in this community. Fortune cookies with old house adages and predictions. No need to give me credit. It's all yours. Take it away. And finally, a listener with the username MyFolkKitchen suggests sitting in the house for a while to feel its energy and flow before making changes, especially anything major. That's good advice. Many thanks to Kelsey, Jamie, and MyFolkKitchen for submitting these responses. If you have an answer to this season's question to add to the mix, go ahead and send me a direct message through social media, or head on over to True Tales from Old Houses and let me know via the contact form, or click on the mic icon in the bottom right-hand corner to leave a voicemail using your phone or computer. Once again, this season's question is, what have you learned since buying your old house? It's time to pause for a moment to thank our sponsors. True Tales from Old Houses continues because of their generous support. So thank you to The Window Course from Scott Seidler of the Craftsman blog and Abitron. The Window Course is a step-by-step do-it-yourself program that will teach you everything you need to know to successfully restore your wood windows. Now, I see you on Instagram and Facebook, and you're ready to learn how to restore windows. You're willing to work hard as educated stewards of your old house, and I deeply admire that. Now is an excellent time to take the window course and make the most of the warm weather months. The window course is yours to keep, so if you are restoring a window and you get stuck, you can go back and review as many times as necessary. No more digging through YouTube trying to figure out which resources are the real deal. The window course is self-paced, so you can go as fast or as slow as you need to, and there are several price points to fit your needs and budget. If you sign up for the Lifetime Access Package or Training Package, then you'll also get a free infrared paint remover, which is a $130 value. The window course is offered with a money-back guarantee, and I've got a coupon code to share. Scott is offering True Tales from Old Houses listeners a special discount. For 10% off, visit thewindowcourse.com and use the coupon code TrueTales. True Tales from Old Houses is also supported by Abitron, manufacturer of two of my very favorite wood repair products, Liquid Wood and Wood Epox. I've talked about both a bunch on Instagram and my blog, and I just bought a fresh batch. So bring on the warm weather, it is time to tackle some wood rot. Wood Epox and Liquid Wood make permanent, cost-effective repairs anywhere you find rotted or damaged wood. And whether you're a first-timer or a professional tradesperson, Abitron products are super easy to use. The instructions are simple, the results are exceptional. No shrinking or sagging, and repairs can be sanded and painted just like wood. Follow Abitron on Facebook and Instagram. You'll find them at Abitron Inc., as in Incorporated. To purchase Liquid Wood and Wood Epox, visit abitron.com and use the coupon code TrueTales10, that's the number 10, to save 10% on your order. My guest today is preservation consultant Leslie Bryans. Leslie is deeply involved in her community and committed to educating and advocating techniques and methods appropriate for preservation, restoration, and rehabilitation of historic properties, specifically in her area and broadly across social media.
My name is Leslie Bryans. I live in Southern Pines, North Carolina. I am a historic preservation consultant, and I'm the executive director of the Pines Preservation Guild, which is a nonprofit here in North Carolina, Moore County. And I also was the chair of our local historic district commission up until about a month ago.
Thank you so much for being here. I know you have a ton going on. You're a busy mom. You have a brand new baby. Congratulations.
Thank you.
I do appreciate you taking your time to do this. I know that it's not easy to break away and come do something adult-like when there's a new baby in the house.
Yep, it's a struggle, but we get it done.
All right. Well, during some previous episodes, I have had some guests on to talk about what it means to put a house on the National Register of Historic Places. And at the same time, we also discussed what protections, if any, national, state, and local designations offer. And we've also touched a little bit on state tax credits too. But today, Leslie, you're here to round out that topic and discuss historic districts. Now, are we talking about municipal or residential or both?
Pretty much both. It depends on where you are. So my experience, I'm going to be talking a lot about North Carolina specific, but it's pretty similar amongst a lot of the 50 states. There's residential, municipal, there's commercial districts, there's overlay districts, and then some of them kind of mesh together.
Okay, let's start by defining those a little bit. What is a historic district? And maybe you can break those down a little bit more for us.
Absolutely. So there's two kinds of historic districts, to be general. There's a national historic district, and then there's a local historic district. And that's usually an overlay zone of some sort. It's not necessarily zoning as in they can and can't tell you what you're going to do with your property, but they do have regulations on that property. And they is the local government. When you are put in the National Register District, that's kind of an overbroad inventory that the National Register, that the federal government has about historic properties. But your local district is where your teeth is when it comes to regulation. So, and that's determined by your local government.
So you mentioned residential versus commercial. I use the word municipal, which is probably wrong. And then you said overlay. So what are we talking about? Is there a difference between all of those?
Not really.
No? Okay.
So, like for instance, in our local government, we have both commercial and residential within our historic overlay district. So there can be some in the standards in the state of North Carolina. They're called standards. They could say, "Oh, here's some treatments for commercial buildings and residential buildings," but they're all within the same zone. Sometimes some localities will say, "Well, this is our commercial district. This is our residential district," and sometimes they'll just combine them.
Okay, so within that historic district, you could have residential neighborhoods, but you could also have maybe a main street with some buildings and coffee shops and boutiques and whatever, and they could all be in the same district coexisting
Absolutely.
together. Okay, interesting. I don't have any experience here in my particular town, but I live in a very historic town overall, so it's not something that people are really reaching for. I admit I'm very lucky in that respect. So why is a historic district important? Why should we consider them important? Because I know they can be controversial. Not everybody wants one.
Well, understanding the difference between the national and the local, I think, is actually very, very important, because you'll hear of efforts to create a national district, and you get all this uproar from people saying, "I don't want the federal government telling you what I can and can't do with my property." National listing doesn't really mean anything. It's, again, an inventory by the federal government, so they know where historic properties are. The great thing about being included in a national register district is you get eligible for tax credits if your state has them. So in North Carolina, we have a state tax credit where you get a nice little credit off your state taxes every year. If you are residential, you get that state tax. If you are a commercial property, you get a state and a federal tax credit. So it's really nice. You get this big chunk of money that, come tax time. But then you don't have someone knocking on your door regulating what you can and can't do, your paint color or whatnot. Another thing that's really great about being in a federal tax credit is if there's any federal projects that are going to be affecting your area, if there's even a cent of money that goes to that project, it could be state and they're getting some federal funding as well. There's something that's called a Section 106 review, and this federal government reviews the project to see if it's affecting any historic properties. So that's a wonderful aspect about the districts.
Could I interject real quick? So when you're talking about something that might affect them, like for instance, a road nearby
Absolutely.
or
Yeah.
something like that. Okay.
That's usually what it is it's a road project, usually road widening. And that's why I always tell people, hey, we have an area here where there is a road widening project going on, and it's affecting some historic properties that the property owners did not put their home on the National Register. So this really isn't a district based. They didn't put their home on the National Register. And as a result, they did not have a Section 106 review, and they're actually facing losing their home to eminent domain because of that. Because according to the federal government, there's no historic properties. That's just one small little example. But if you hear about your towns looking at getting a district on the National Register, it's really something to be celebrated, because there's a more pros than there are cons.
And we'll get into cons in just a minute, but I do think that is a misconception. And I feel like we've harped on it a little bit on this show that, national designation is the plaque. It's not a, here's now what you can and cannot do. And it feels like no matter how many times we say that or somebody else says it, there's still that misconception that getting your house in that inventory, I like the way you called it an inventory, means the beginning of the end for you as the decision maker in your house. And that's just not true.
Absolutely.
I did an Instagram live with Nick and Damien from the Kimball House, and we went really in depth there about the tax credits, state tax credits. So if anybody's interested in knowing more about applying for state tax credits and how that all works, they can refer to that, and I'll put that in the show notes. That's a big perk that people don't realize that they can become eligible for. And like you said, not all states are eligible. I think, is it 6 or 9 states that don't? I can't recall.
I believe it's 6. Usually if there's no income tax, there's no state tax credit. So,
right.
But it is the number one carrot we have in the preservation world is tax credits, to really encourage that.
We should talk about the cons. What is a con of being a part of a historic district
Well, the biggest con I know of is the misconception by the insurance industry.
We've never talked about that on the show before.
And that's kind of something I wish like the National Trust would take on, is this whole idea of you have these insurers that don't understand that being in a national historic district doesn't mean that you have to build things back a specific way. But sometimes some insurers will say, "Oh, you're in a national district or you're nationally registered. We won't insure your property." And it depends. I've heard some stories. Now, granted, that means you still need to keep shopping, but we've heard of that, unfortunately.
Do you think that's because they believe that people would keep things that they would like them to upgrade for modern
No,
standards, energy efficiency? I mean, what's the purpose? I don't even understand where they're coming from.
because they think and I am not an insurance agent, but my understanding is that if the house burns down, they're thinking, oh, they want it built back exactly the same way.
Oh.
/ it has to abide by certain rules and regulations, which is usually the truth with a local historic district, but not with a national. So, and honestly, I don't know a lot of historic property owners that if their house did unfortunately burn down would want it built back with modern materials. And that gets into, material integrity and whatnot. But yeah.
So let me go. I heard you say something about local. So I want to make sure that we're getting all the right information. So if somebody is in a local historic district and their house terribly burned down, would they have to build it back the way it was?
Not necessarily. First of all, it's dependent on the local district, but usually, at least here in the town that we live in right now, no, you don't. You do, however, new construction. So historic overlay districts in the state of North Carolina, and this again could be the case in most historic districts throughout or most states. This is the only district that really has architectural regulations. You can't regulate like a residential overlay zone. You can't regulate a commercial zone for architectural, but you can if it's a historic district overlay zone. And so they will have regulations in their standards for new construction. So saying, you can use these materials, you cannot use these materials, XYZ, this is what your form has to look like. That's something that a local district would have in their standards.
Right. And that makes sense because they would want a new construction project to blend in with the community. Is that what they're thinking? Is that the thinking behind it?
Yeah,
to some
it's
degree?
The context. They want there to still be the complementary structures and forms, because most of our historic districts are pedestrian based, unless you're getting into more of the newer historic districts, which are post-war. The majority of our historic districts in America are pre-World War II, where everything was really based on the pedestrian. And so they don't want to have a house, essentially a McMansion, put on a property that was, a small vernacular cottage, for instance, that gets torn down. They don't want a brick behemoth essentially put on there that is completely out of context and just throws the rhythm off of the neighborhood.
Okay, that makes sense. So within these historic districts, what happens if someone wants to buy a house in a historic district? What changes for the buyer? What do they inherit from the seller?
Well, first and foremost, buyers should always beware. Do your research. Realtors should know, and they should inform you that that's not always the case. If you are in a local, well, maybe we should talk about what a local district is how,
yeah, let's go backwards before we go forwards.
A local district is going to be the teeth, as I mentioned earlier, of regulation. And that is going to be essentially a number of residents, usually a board between 3 to 7, will be considered a commission, and that's established by your local government. And they are the panel, essentially, of people that will be able to review certificates of appropriateness for major works on your property. So what does that all mean? That's a lot of jargon.
Yeah.
Certificate of appropriateness. If you are a homeowner and you are saying, you know what, I'm in a local historic district and I have a house and I want to expand the porch that I have. Okay, great. That could be wonderful. That could be really, it could be a great project, but it does need to go through your permit, your planning department, how you would normally get a permit for any work that you're doing on the exterior of your home. So you would go down to your planning department and say, I want to put this porch on my property. And the planning department has kind of like a checklist of what is a minor work, what is a major work. Minor work, they look it over and go, oh, okay, you're just replacing a column on your porch, like with like, same thing. You're painting it the same color. It's just you're dealing with rot. That is a minor work that does not need to go before your historic district commission. But if you're coming in saying, oh, I want to take the entire porch off and I want to put, tracks like that kind of composite in, and I want to put, steel banister in and that sort of thing, that's considered a major work because it's not like with like. And so that would go before this panel of residents in the town. And they look at it and they say, okay, this is looking at the standards that have been created and approved by our town. This, yes, is complimentary, or no, this is not acceptable. And so in the state of North Carolina, those are considered essentially final decisions. So you as a homeowner, it's like getting an approval from the town council, as opposed to just like a existing board that's just kind of there, like a planning board in the state of North Carolina. They're just there to kind of give recommendations to the town council. State of North Carolina, it's called quasi-judicial. They are pretty much what they say goes kind of thing. The commission, the Historic District Commission. That's a lot stuffed into one little, very short explanation.
That's okay. What are the qualifications for someone on the planning commission? Like, where do they come from? Are they just willing people, or do they come in with a set of skills that might be helpful in making these types of decisions?
Yeah. So again, it is completely up to the town council, the governing board, as to what those qualifications will be. But the state gives suggestions, and the state says you really should have it so these people have XYZ background. So generally that's people that have a background in architecture, construction, preservation, which we're few and far between, but we do exist. Or people who have historic properties, people who live within the historic district. And then sometimes it's just residents. But or history. There's some people at times you have people that have history backgrounds or planning backgrounds. So they try to narrow it down, but it isn't always if you're in a situation where you are desperate to find people for your board. So sometimes in these smaller communities, when it's harder to find someone with those backgrounds because there's not always an architecture person in a town of 800 people, they will kind of broaden the scope a little bit.
Okay. Is it time to talk about what a buyer can look forward to if they buy a house in a historic district?
So again, the number one thing I can recommend to people who, even if you are in a suspected historic district, because it's not always clearly labeled, it's not always like there's street signs, and it's not always very clear that you are in a local historic district. Ask your realtor, but ultimately call your planning department and say, I'm buying a house that's over 50 years old. Am I in a historic district? Give them your address, and then they will let you know, because usually they're flagged, or usually they can tell you whether or not you are in a historic district. And that will give you, that's the number one thing I can suggest. And what you can inherit is and this is kind of a scary thought, if there was work that was not approved that was done to the property, and you purchase that property either during or before there's been any rectification of that work, you can inherit the fees, and you can inherit the fact that work has to get done. So if said porch was done without a certificate of appropriateness, the person who did that puts the house up on the market before the commission can levy the fine and then say, hey, you got to fix what you've done. It can get passed on to whoever purchases that property. And then that person is kind of like, oh, deer in headlights. Wait, what? I'm supposed to fix this? I've got to spend thousands of dollars fixing this? Yeah. That's kind of a rare thing.
Seems like it would be.
But I think a lot of the confusion and the frustration arises when you have a commission that doesn't do outreach and doesn't let their presence known, if they don't send mailers out, or if they don't educate local realtors about this. You have people that purchase into a hot housing market right now. Local historic districts are really desirable places to live because, again, they are regulated, not like an HOA, but they're regulated. And they're very steady when it comes to home values. People will buy into it not thinking what is entailed in in owning historic homes. So then they say, okay, well, I bought this house. I want to replace my windows. That's the number one thing that you're walking around a house. You're walking around with your realtor and, you're looking at a home and you're saying, oh, a really beautiful old home, but those windows they're not energy efficient. You've got to replace them. Well, it's not that easy because if you are in a local historic district, that is a major work. And I would say about 90% of local historic districts, window replacement, door replacement, any of those things are major works. And you're looking at possibly, most likely, getting that denied. And so that's something that you have to think about. Or if you want to paint your house a hot pink and you live in a historic district where that is regulated, paint colors are regulated, you could be really disappointed or you could get really frustrated and get mad with your historic district commission because they're not letting you do what you want, but you didn't do your due diligence.
Yeah. Well, and let's be clear too, all of this affects the exterior of a house. This doesn't really do anything for the interior.
Absolutely.
But yeah, inside, if you want to have that Pinterest fantasy come true, then you can, because I have seen all of that all over the real estate in Salt Lake City because I've been looking for that a lot.
Oh, yeah?
And it's just like remove every wall, put a barn door in, paint everything gray and call it a day.
Yep.
I'm not telling you to do that. I'm just saying that's not regulated.
And in a lot of historic districts, it is right of way that's regulated. So you can do whatever you want on the back of the house as long as it's not visible from the right of way. We have here in Southern Pines, there was a whole thing about not putting a third story. There was a business owner that their home and their business were in the same building, very typical of local commercial districts. And they wanted to put a rooftop garden, like a third floor on. What they ended up doing was they had it recessed to a point where you really cannot see it from your local right of way. That's another thing is understand that there's a group of people, there's 3 to 7 people that want to work with you. They don't just want to be nomen. They want to be able to be a resource.
I think that's an important note too, because we hear a lot of the negative. They're afraid of the Planning Commission, not necessarily because they've had an experience with the Planning Commission, but because they believe all of these myths and things that just keep perpetuating over the years. And it's good to know that that Planning Commission is there to say yes. They just want the right reason to say yes. They want the right information presented in front of them and for everything to fit within the guidelines of the historic district. Makes sense to me.
And it's important to know as a homeowner that the standards for work on homes, they are available online, or you can call your planning department and ask for a copy of them. So it's not a big surprise. And as a general rule, especially again in our state, we have something called a certified local government program, which is run through the State Historic Preservation Office. And I'm assuming it's the same way in a lot of other states. But the commissions go through training called certified local government training every year. And their standards have to abide by the Secretary of the Interior standards for rehabilitation, which preservationists know is, our Bible.
Sure.
But that is really what we go by. So it's not arbitrary. It's not that we're just sitting there saying, well, we don't like you, Bob, because you're coming to us with a plan. And it doesn't matter what I like. I'm going by the standards. And this is what it says, and this is what we're going by. And as a member of our community, there's a reason that we're deciding that we want to abide by these standards because we're interested in the integrity and the perseverance of this district for the next 5, 10, 20 years beyond us living here. And we live in a very transient area. We have a lot of military coming in and out, and it's kind of like they're only going to be here for 3 years. So you got to kind of educate them about, it's not about the 3 years that you're here. It's about 10, 20, 30 years from now, 100 years from now.
And you mentioned that it does vary state to state, and it does, but each state has the State Historic Preservation Office, and that's called the SHPO. Sometimes you hear people call it the SHPO.
I have to refrain from saying that a lot because people have no idea what I'm saying. And I'm just like, okay, State Historic Preservation Office, the SHPO. Yes.
The local committees, offices, whatnot may vary a little bit from state to state, but the SHPO's there. You could start with the SHPO and work down to your local level. What happens when someone wants to sell their house in a historic district? Is there a way to talk that up? Like, why is this a good thing? Why, if I want to sell my house and it's on the National Register and also on the state and local, what do I want people to know about that?
Well, again, tax credit eligibility for any work. That's big. And even if you're not in a national district, but you're in a local district, it's the same. The state looks at it going, okay, well, you're locally landmarked, or you're in a local district, or you're in a state district or a federal district, it's all considered the same. It's a certified historic property. And so that is something that you can advertise and say, hey, this is a great, really eligible for tax credits if you need to do a new roof, or if you need, which you wouldn't be saying, I need a new roof on my house if you're selling it. But, that's always saying, I try to tell realtors, this is a really good thing that it's eligible for tax credits. The other thing is that you can expect your property values to stay very steady. And Donovan Ripkema with Place Economics has done a ton of research on the actual economics of local districts and how they're very, very steady as opposed to a fluctuating market, which is good.
That's a recent follow for me on Instagram, Place Economics. And I'm going to put that in the show notes because it is so interesting. So much food for thought there.
So Donovan, which is really funny because when I was in graduate school, he actually spoke at one of our preservation conferences, and the work that he does, it is all, if you are a numbers person and you actually want the numbers of why preservation is important and why local districts are really, really important, he's got that. So it is just a plethora of wonderful information and actual research that he's done. It's wonderful.
Well, if you have any links that you could share with me about living in historic districts or starting preservation organizations, I would love to put some of those in the show notes.
Absolutely.
I know you're on social media, but are you on a social media that you share with other people? Is that something that we could put in the show notes too?
Yeah. So there's my personal one, which is, Leslie.Bryans, and that's public. It's preservation, but a lot more family. And then there's our nonprofit organization, the Pines Preservation Guild, and that's at Pines Preservation Guild. And then our restoration account for our new house is Robin's House Revival.
All right, we'll put all of those in the show notes so everybody can find you and links and everything. And just thank you. Thank you so much for being here today. And I do hope that baby gives you at least one solid block of sleep tonight.
She's down, so I'm happy.
All right, well, great. Thank you so much. And I will see you on Instagram.
Absolutely.
Thank you for listening to True Tales from Old Houses. And thank you to my guests, Leslie Bryans and Lindsay Jones from Blind Eye Restoration. If you have a moment, we would love it if you would leave a positive rating or review wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Ratings and reviews make the podcast world go round. To continue the conversation, be sure to follow True Tales from Old Houses and Blake Hill House on Facebook and Instagram. For bonus content and special offerings, please consider becoming a subscriber on our brand new Patreon. And if you're looking for more information about this episode, including photos, show notes, coupon codes, and to request a transcript, visit truetalesfromoldhouses.com. Until next time.